No woman should have to run from her own home, especially when she's 8 months pregnant and carrying the weight of new life. But that's exactly what Emma Thompson does on a cold October night, standing barefoot in her driveway while dialing 911. "My husband is chasing me," she tells the operator, her voice shaking with fear. The police rush to her address, ready to arrest a dangerous man. But when they arrive, they find Emma alone and terrified outside her house. Her husband Thomas isn't there because he died in a boating accident 11 months ago. The officers think Emma is having some kind of breakdown, but then strange things start happening at her mother's old farmhouse where she goes to hide. Messages appear, footprints show up in the mud. Someone is watching her. How can a dead man be hunting his pregnant wife? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma Thompson had never imagined she would spend her 38th birthday alone, 8 months pregnant, and afraid of shadows. The suburban house on Maple Street looked peaceful enough from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawn, flower boxes that she still tended out of habit rather than hope. But inside these walls, memories lingered like smoke, and every creaking floorboard seemed to whisper Thomas's name. She moved through the living room slowly, one hand supporting her swollen belly, the other trailing along the mahogany bookshelf. Thomas had insisted they buy during their 2nd year of marriage. "A man needs a proper library," he had said, though he never read anything beyond financial reports and hunting magazines. The books were hers. Poetry collections, classic novels, gardening guides, but he had arranged them according to his own system. Even now, 11 months after his death, she couldn't bring herself to reorganize them. The wedding photos still lined the mantelpiece, though she had turned most of them face down. In the ones that remained upright, Thomas's smile looked different, now than it had 5 years ago. Where she had once seen confidence and charm, she now recognized something harder, more calculating. His arm around her waist in their engagement photo seemed possessive rather than loving. His hand on her shoulder at their wedding reception looked more like a claim of ownership than affection. Emma settled into her mother's old rocking chair, the one piece of furniture Thomas had never liked, and opened the leather journal she had been keeping since the funeral. Dr. Patterson, her obstetrician, had suggested writing down her thoughts to help process her grief. What she had discovered instead was a catalogue of fear, confusion, and slowly dawning awareness. March 15th, she had written 3 weeks after Thomas's memorial service. Found myself apologizing to his empty chair at dinner. Old habits. April 2nd, realized I haven't spoken to Janet or Beth since the wedding. When did I stop calling my friends? When did they stop calling me? May 18th. The baby kicked for the first time today. I wished I could tell someone who would be happy for me, instead of sorry for my loss. The entries had grown more troubling as the months passed. Emma flipped through pages of observations that painted a picture she had been too close to see while living it. Thomas's suggestions about her appearance, his subtle criticisms of her friends, his way of making every decision seem like a joint choice while never actually asking for her input. She had met Thomas during her final semester at the State University. Emma was working toward her master's degree in library science, planning a quiet life surrounded by books and helping others find the information they needed. Thomas was completing his business degree, already talking about partnerships and investment opportunities with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Thomas sent flowers to her workplace, surprised her with weekend trips, and talked about their future together before she had fully processed that they were dating. Her friends had called it romantic. Her mother, the one time Emma brought him home, had been politely reserved. "He seems very sure of himself," her mother had said after Thomas left that evening. They were washing dishes in the farmhouse kitchen, the same kitchen where Emma had learned to bake bread and can peaches, where her mother had taught her that a woman's strength came from knowing her own mind. That's not a bad thing, is it? Emma had asked, defensive of this man who made her feel chosen, special. Her mother had dried a plate slowly, considering her words. Confidence is attractive, sweetheart, but pay attention to whether he's sure about you or just sure about what he wants you to be. Emma hadn't understood the distinction then. Now, sitting in the house Thomas had selected, furnished and controlled down to the color of the bathroom towels, her mother's wisdom felt like a prophecy. The pregnancy had been a surprise in more ways than one. Emma discovered she was expecting 2 weeks after the Coast Guard called off the search for Thomas's body. The timing seemed impossible. They hadn't been intimate in months before his death. Thomas had been traveling frequently, for work, or at least that's what he told her. He would disappear for days at a time, returning home irritable and distant. She remembered the last night they had shared before his final business trip. Thomas had been different, almost desperate in his attention to her, asking strange questions about her loyalty, her plans, whether she'd been talking to anyone about their relationship. At the time, she had attributed his intensity to work stress. Now she wondered if he had suspected something, if he had known about James. James. Emma's chest tightened at the memory of her colleague at the county library. He had been everything. Thomas wasn't. Gentle, interested in her thoughts, content to listen rather than direct. Their brief relationship had been more emotional than physical. Stolen conversations during lunch breaks, a few careful kisses in the stacks after closing. Time. Emma had ended it when Thomas returned from one of his trips, guilt and fear overwhelming her need for companionship. She never told James about the pregnancy. By the time she realized she was carrying his child, Thomas was dead, and James had transferred to a library system 3 counties away. The secret sat in her chest like a stone, growing heavier with each passing month. Mrs. Patterson from next door knocked on the front door around 3 o'clock, as she did most afternoons. Emma had grown to appreciate the elderly woman's routine visits, though she suspected they were motivated more by concern than neighborly friendship. "How are you feeling today, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked, settling into the kitchen chair Thomas had designated as hers during the few times they had entertained. "You look pale." Emma poured tea from the pot she had prepared in anticipation of the visit. "Just tired. The baby was active last night. That's a good sign. Active babies are healthy babies." Mrs. Patterson stirred honey into her cup, studying Emma with sharp eyes. "Are you eating enough? You're carrying that baby awfully small." "Dr. Patterson says everything is fine." Emma touched her belly self-consciously. She had been small throughout the pregnancy, probably due to stress and her inability to keep much food down during the first trimester. The baby seemed to be developing normally, but she felt fragile, as if she might break apart at any moment. "And you're sleeping," Emma hesitated. Sleep had become elusive since moving back into the house. She dozed fitfully, startling awake at sounds that might have been wind, or might have been footsteps. Last week, she could have sworn she heard Thomas's key in the front door lock, the same deliberate jingling he had always done to announce his arrival. But when she crept downstairs to check, the door was locked, and the street was empty. "Well, enough," she said finally. Mrs. Patterson's expression suggested she wasn't convinced. "You know, dear, that farmhouse of your mother's is still sitting empty. Might do you good to get out of this place for a while. Fresh air, different scenery." Emma had been thinking the same thing. The farmhouse held happier memories. Summers spent helping her mother in the garden, learning to preserve vegetables, reading on the wide front porch while thunderstorms rolled across the valley. Her mother had left her the property, along with a small inheritance that Thomas had never been able to access or control. "I might do that," Emma admitted, "after the baby comes." "Why wait? You could get settled. Maybe fix up the nursery in that sunny room upstairs. Your mother always said that room had the best light in the house." The idea took root as they finished their tea. Thomas had never liked the farmhouse, had always found excuses to avoid visiting Emma's mother. Too isolated, he claimed, too far from civilization. but Emma remembered it as a place where she could think clearly, where her mother's practical wisdom seemed to seep from the very walls. After Mrs. Patterson left, Emma climbed the stairs to what had been intended as the baby's room. Thomas had started painting it yellow, a neutral color, he said, since they didn't know the baby's sex. The walls were half finished, abandoned when Thomas left for his final trip. Emma had been unable to enter the room since his death, but now she pushed open the door and stood in the doorway. The paint cans sat exactly where Thomas had left them, brush balanced across the top of one container. His reading glasses lay folded. On the windowsill next to a notepad covered with measurements and sketches for built-in shelving. It was as if he had simply stepped out and would return any moment to finish the work. Emma walked to the window and looked out at the street where she had stood barefoot and terrified just 3 days ago, calling 911 about a dead man who had seemed all too real in that moment. The rational part of her mind insisted it had been a nightmare, a product of grief and hormones and the stress of impending motherhood. But her hands still shook when she thought about it, and she found herself checking the locks on all the doors before bed each night. The farmhouse, she decided, was looking more appealing by the hour. The farmhouse stood at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by 30 acres of rolling pasture and woodland that had been in Emma's family for 3 generations. Her mother had lived here alone for the last 15 years of her life, tending a vegetable garden and raising chickens with the contentment of someone who had found her place in the world. Emma pulled into the circular driveway on a grey November afternoon, her car loaded with suitcases and the few belongings Thomas hadn't chosen for their suburban home. The wraparound porch welcomed her like an old friend's embrace. Emma remembered summer evenings spent here with her mother, shelling peas and watching fireflies dance across the meadow. The rocking chairs were still there, weathered but sturdy, positioned to catch the last rays of sunlight each day. She unlocked the front door with the key her mother had pressed into her hand during their final conversation in the hospital. "This place will always be yours," her mother had whispered, her voice weak but her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't let anyone take it from you." Inside, the farmhouse smelled of lavender and old wood, exactly as Emma remembered. Her mother's furniture remained in place: the hand-carved dining table, the stone fireplace with its collection of family photographs, the built-in bookshelves filled with gardening manuals, poetry collections, and her grandmother's leather-bound journals. Emma ran her fingers along the spines, feeling a connection to the women who had found strength within these walls. The kitchen was her mother's masterpiece, with its deep porcelain sink, butcher-block counters, and the ancient cast-iron stove that could heat the entire downstairs on winter mornings. Emma made herself a cup of tea and sat at the round oak table where she had done homework as a child, where her mother had taught her to roll pie crust and can peaches. As evening approached, Emma explored the upstairs rooms she hadn't seen in years. Her childhood bedroom remained unchanged, the same quilt on the narrow bed, the same view of the barn and pasture through lace curtains, but it was her mother's room that drew her attention. On the nightstand, she found a leather journal she had never seen before, filled with her mother's careful handwriting. October 15th, 1985. Robert hit me again today. Emma was at school, thank God. I covered the bruise with makeup, but Mrs. Williams next door keeps asking questions. I don't know what to tell her. Emma's hands trembled as she read. Her father had died when she was 12, and she remembered him as a quiet man who worked hard and loved baseball. Her mother had never spoken ill of him, had kept his photograph on the dresser, and told Emma stories about their courtship that made him sound romantic and devoted. November 3rd, 1985. Found the courage to call the shelter today. They have a bed available, but I can't take Emma away from her school, her friends. Robert promised it won't happen again. He always promises. December 20th, 1985. Emma asked why I don't smile anymore. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that her father scares you, that you lie awake at night wondering if this will be the time he doesn't stop hitting? The entries continued for months, chronicling a pattern Emma recognized with growing horror. Her father's apologies, her mother's hope that things would change, the gradual erosion of her mother's confidence and joy. Emma had lived through the same cycle with Thomas, though his violence had been psychological rather than physical. June 1st, 1987. Robert's drinking is getting worse. Last night he grabbed Emma's arm when she spilled milk at dinner. Left marks. That's my line in the sand. No one hurts my daughter. June 15th, 1987. Packed our bags while Robert was at work. Left a note saying we're visiting my sister in Ohio. Not sure what comes next, but anywhere is better than walking on eggshells in my own home. Emma flipped through pages chronicling their escape. Her mother's struggle to find work and housing. The slow rebuilding of their lives. She vaguely remembered that summer they had stayed with her aunt for several weeks before moving into a small apartment in town. Her mother had told her it was an adventure, a chance to see new places. August 10th, 1987, Robert died in the car accident yesterday. I should feel sad, but mostly I feel relieved. Emma will never have to be afraid of him again. We can go home. They had returned to the farmhouse that fall. Emma remembered her relief at being back in familiar surroundings, though she had never understood why they left in the first place. Her mother had thrown herself into making the farmhouse a sanctuary, installing new locks, planting the herb garden, filling the rooms with music and laughter. She had never remarried, never even dated as far as Emma knew. The journal entries from later years revealed why. Her mother had dedicated herself to recognizing the signs of abuse, to helping other women in similar situations. She had volunteered at the women's shelter, donated money anonymously to families trying to escape dangerous relationships. Most importantly, she had tried to teach Emma to value her own voice, her own choices. May 3rd, 2010. Emma brought that. Young man home today, Thomas. Something about him makes me uneasy. The way he answers for her, the way she defers to his opinion on everything. I see myself at her age, making excuses for behavior that should concern me. September 20th, 2015. Emma's wedding is next month. I tried to talk to her yesterday about marriage, about keeping her own identity, but she says I worry too much. Thomas bought her engagement ring without asking what she preferred. She seems to think that's romantic. I remember thinking the same thing about Robert's surprises. December the 1st, 2018. Emma hasn't called in 3 weeks. When I phoned, Thomas answered and said she was busy. I could hear her in the background asking who was calling. Why would he need to screen her calls? This feels familiar in the worst possible way. Emma closed the journal with shaking hands. Her mother had seen the truth she had been too deep in the situation to recognize. The parallels were undeniable. The isolation, the control disguised as care, the gradual erosion of independence. She made herself dinner from food she had brought from town, then settled into her mother's chair by the fireplace to process what she had learned. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending autumn leaves across the porch. Emma found the sound comforting rather than scary. It was honest weather, nothing hidden or deceptive about it. Around 9 o'clock, she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. A car door slamming somewhere near the barn. Emma turned off the lights and crept to the kitchen window, peering through the curtains at the darkness outside. She could make out the shape of the barn, but nothing else was visible in the moonless night. Then she saw it, a figure moving across the yard, too far away to identify but definitely human. The person seemed to be walking toward the house, moving with purpose rather than wandering randomly. Emma's heart pounded as she watched. The shadow approached the porch steps. The footsteps on the wooden porch were deliberate, familiar. Emma knew that walk, that particular rhythm of boot heels on weathered boards. Thomas had always walked that way, confident, claiming ownership of every space he entered. The front door handle turned slowly. Emma had locked it, she was certain. but the handle continued to move, as if someone was testing it methodically. Then came the sound that made her legs weak, Thomas's voice clear as if he were standing next to her. "Emma, I know you're in there. We need to talk." She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, hardly daring to breathe. It was impossible. Thomas was dead, had been declared dead by the Coast Guard after they found pieces of his boat washed up on shore. She had identified his personal effects, had sat through a memorial service where his business partners spoke about his dedication and ambition. "You can't hide from me forever," the voice continued. "I know about the baby, Emma. I know everything." The door handle stopped moving. Footsteps crossed the porch, descended the steps, moved around the side of the house. Emma heard them pause beneath her bedroom window, then continue toward the back of the house. She grabbed her cell phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's outside my house, Emma whispered. They're trying to get in. Ma'am, I need you to speak up. Are you in immediate danger? My husband? Emma stopped herself. How could she explain that her dead husband was circling her house like a predator? Someone's outside. They know I'm here alone. What's your address? Emma gave the dispatcher directions to the farmhouse, then crept upstairs to her childhood bedroom, where she could see the driveway. No vehicle was visible, but that didn't mean anything. Thomas could have parked on the road and walked up through the woods. The police arrived 20 minutes later, their headlights sweeping across the yard as they pulled into the driveway. Emma watched from the window as two officers got out of their patrol car and approached the house with flashlights. She met them at the front door, grateful for their presence, but unsure how to explain what she had experienced. Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. You reported someone trying to break in. I heard footsteps on the porch, someone trying the door handle. They spoke to me through the door. Emma wrapped her robe tighter around her pregnant body, aware of how vulnerable she must appear. Did you recognize the voice? Emma hesitated. It sounded like my husband, but that's impossible because he's dead. The officers exchanged glances. When did your husband pass away, ma'am? 11 months ago. Boating accident. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. I know how this sounds, but someone was definitely out there. Officer Rodriguez was kind but thorough in his questions. They searched the property, checking around the house and barn, but found no signs of an intruder. No footprints in the soft earth around the porch, no vehicle tracks in the gravel driveway. Is it possible you might have dozed off and had a nightmare? The other officer asked gently. Pregnancy can cause very vivid dreams, especially when you're under stress, Emma wanted to argue, to insist on what she had heard and seen, but doubt crept in. The pregnancy had made her emotional, sometimes irrational. Grief could cause hallucinations. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her, creating the presence of the person she most feared and needed. After the police left, Emma double-checked every lock in the house and positioned chairs against the doors. She spent the rest of the night, awake in her mother's chair, staring out at the darkness and wondering if she was losing her mind. Emma woke to find Thomas's favorite coffee mug sitting on the kitchen counter, steam rising from freshly brewed coffee. The blue ceramic mug with "World's Best Husband" printed in fading letters had been a wedding gift from his mother, a woman who had never particularly liked Emma, but had made her opinions known through passive-aggressive presence. She stared at the mug for a full minute, her heart hammering against her ribs. The coffee was hot, recent, positioned exactly where Thomas used to sit for his morning routine. Emma was certain she had locked every door and window before going to sleep, more certain still that she had not made coffee or retrieved this particular mug from the box of Thomas's belongings she had packed away months ago. Her hands shook as she dumped the coffee down the sink and washed the mug thoroughly, as if she could scrub away the impossibility of its appearance. She searched the house room by room, checking every closet, every corner where someone might hide, but found nothing. Disturbed, no signs of entry. Detective Burns arrived at 10 o'clock in response to her call. He was a sturdy man in his 50s, with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to dealing with people in crisis. Emma had requested him specifically after Officer Rodriguez mentioned that Burns handled domestic cases and had experience with stalking situations. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you've been having some concerning incidents," he said, settling into a kitchen chair and declining her offer of coffee. "Tell me about your relationship with your husband." Emma found herself struggling to articulate what she had never acknowledged out loud. "How do you explain that love can feel like suffocation, that care can become control so gradually you don't notice until you're gasping for air?" "Thomas was—" She paused, searching for words. "He was very involved in my life. He liked to know where I was, who I was with. He said it was because he loved me, because he worried." Detective Burns nodded encouragingly. "Can you give me some specific examples?" "He chose my clothes sometimes, said I looked better in certain colors, certain styles. He didn't like my job at the library, thought it was beneath me, but then he didn't want me to look for something else either. Said we didn't need the money, that I should focus on being a good wife." The words came easier once she started. Emma described Thomas's habit of answering her phone, his way of steering conversations when they were with other people, his insistence on joint bank accounts that he managed exclusively. Taken individually, each behavior could be explained away as caring or practical. Together, they painted a picture of systematic control. "Did he ever threaten you physically?" Emma shook her head. "Thomas never hit me. He wasn't that kind of man. He was just intense about things being done his way. He said he knew what was best for us." Emotional abuse is still abuse, Mrs. Thompson. It can be just as damaging as physical violence, sometimes more so because it's harder to recognize and prove. After Detective Burns left, promising to increase patrols around the farmhouse, Emma found herself feeling simultaneously validated and terrified. If Thomas's behavior had been abusive, what did that make her? A victim? A fool? Both? Mrs. Patterson arrived that afternoon with a casserole and her usual sharp-eyed concern. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she announced, unpacking containers from her basket. "And you're too thin. That baby needs proper nutrition." Emma appreciated the older woman's directness. Mrs. Patterson had been her mother's friend, as well as neighbor, one of the few people who had visited regularly during her mother's final illness. She had known Emma as a child and seemed determined to provide the maternal care Emma had lost. "I've been having trouble settling in," Emma admitted. "Strange noises at night, things that don't make sense." "What kind of things?" Mrs. Patterson paused in her arrangement of food containers, giving Emma her full attention. Emma described the coffee mug, the footsteps on the porch, the voice that sounded impossibly like Thomas. Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "Your mother went through something similar after your father died," she said finally. "Not exactly the same, but she used to see him sometimes, hear his voice calling her name. The grief counselor said it was normal, part of the process. But Thomas wasn't—" Emma stopped herself. She had been about to say that Thomas wasn't a good husband like her father had been, but her mother's journal had revealed that truth to be more complicated. "How long did it last?" "Months, maybe a year. But Emma, your mother was grieving a man she loved, despite everything. Your situation might be different." Mrs. Patterson's carefully neutral tone suggested she knew more about Emma's marriage than she was saying. Emma wondered how much her mother had shared with her friend, what observations had passed between neighbors who had watched a young woman gradually disappear into someone else's expectations. "Did you ever see anyone around here who didn't belong?" Emma asked. "Before Thomas died, I mean. Anyone watching the house or asking questions?" Mrs. Patterson considered this. "There was a man who came by a few times last spring, said he was doing survey work for the county, but I never saw any survey equipment, and he seemed more interested in when you were home than in property lines. I should have mentioned it to your mother, but, well, she had enough to worry about with the cancer treatments." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. "What did he look like?" Average height, brown hair, nice clothes, professional looking. He had a van with some kind of company logo, but I can't recall what it said. Mrs. Patterson frowned, trying to retrieve the memory. He asked about your husband's travel schedule. Said he needed to coordinate with the homeowner about accessing the property. Seemed odd that he wouldn't know who owned the place if he was legitimate. After Mrs. Patterson left, Emma called Detective Burns to report this new information. He took notes carefully and promised to check with the county about any recent survey. Work in the area. Emma hung up feeling like she was building a case for something, though she wasn't sure what. That evening, she sat at her mother's desk and opened a fresh notebook. If she was going crazy, at least she would document the process. If someone was really stalking her, she would have evidence. She wrote down everything she could remember about the past few days. Times, dates, specific details about each incident. November 8th, 6:30 a.m. Found Thomas's coffee mug on kitchen counter with fresh coffee. Mug was packed away in basement storage. All doors and windows still locked. November 7th, 9:15 p.m. Heard footsteps on front porch, voice calling my name. Sounded exactly like Thomas. Police found no evidence of intruder. November 6th, various times. Feeling of being watched while doing yard work. Caught glimpses of movement in tree line, but nothing definitive when I looked directly. As she wrote, Emma realized the incidents had been escalating in frequency and boldness. If someone was indeed stalking her, they were getting more confident, more willing to take risks. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange sense of relief. Fear of the unknown was worse than fear of something concrete, something you could name and fight. She was 8 months pregnant and alone in an isolated farmhouse, but she was not helpless. Her mother had survived abuse and built a life of strength and independence. Emma had inherited that farmhouse and everything it represented. She would not be driven away from her sanctuary by shadows and suppositions. But as she prepared for bed, Emma found herself checking the locks twice and positioning. A baseball bat within easy reach. She was ready to fight, but she preferred to be prepared for whatever came next. The hospital bracelet arrived in Emma's mailbox on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside an envelope with no return address. The plastic band was white with black printing. Thomas Barrett Thompson, D.O.B., Joe 315 to 1985. Admit 10/28/2024. The date was less than 2 weeks ago. Emma stared at the bracelet until her vision blurred, then called Detective Burns with hands that trembled so badly she could barely dial the number. He arrived within an hour, bringing crime scene equipment and a grimness that told Emma her situation had moved beyond the realm of grief-induced hallucinations. "This is definitely your husband's information," Detective Burns asked, photographing the bracelet from multiple angles. "Yes, same full name, correct birthday." Emma wrapped her arms around her swollen belly, feeling the baby flutter restlessly as if responding to her distress. "But Thomas is dead. The Coast Guard searched for 3 days. They found pieces of his boat, his life jacket. Bodies aren't always recovered, especially in rough water. It's possible he survived and has been hiding somewhere, maybe getting medical treatment under a false identity until recently. The idea that Thomas might be alive, that he had let her grieve him, attend his memorial service, struggle through pregnancy alone while he watched from the shadows, filled Emma with a rage so pure it surprised her with its intensity. Detective Burns spent the morning interviewing neighbors and checking with local hospitals about patients matching Thomas's description. Mrs. Patterson confirmed seeing the same surveyor she had mentioned before, this time with a better description. Medium build, clean-shaven, driving a white van with medical equipment logos. Said he was checking water quality in private wells. "Medical equipment?" Emma repeated. Thomas trained as a paramedic before he went into business. He knew enough about healthcare to fake credentials, forge documents. Detective Burns nodded grimly. "We're expanding the investigation. I'm also recommending you stay somewhere else. For a while, somewhere with better security. Emma shook her head. This is my home now, my mother's home. I won't be driven away by someone playing psychological games. But even as she spoke defiantly, Emma found herself jumping at every sound, checking locks compulsively, keeping curtains drawn even during daylight hours. The baby seemed to sense her stress, moving constantly, pressing tiny limbs against her ribs in what felt like protest against the tension surrounding them both. Her sister Julie called that evening, concern evident in her voice. Mrs. Patterson called me. She says you're having some kind of breakdown, seeing Thomas everywhere. I'm not having a breakdown, Emma said, pacing the kitchen while balancing the phone against her shoulder. Thomas is alive, Julie. He's been stalking me, leaving evidence, trying to drive me crazy. Emma, listen to yourself. Thomas is dead. You identified his personal effects. We had a memorial service. I can't what? Can't trust my own perceptions. Can't believe evidence when it's sitting right in front of me. Emma's voice rose with each word. Everyone keeps telling me I'm imagining things, but I'm not. Someone is doing this to me. The silence on Julie's end stretched long enough that Emma wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, her sister spoke in the careful tone people use with fragile things. I'm coming down tomorrow. We need to talk face to face. After Julie hung up, Emma sat in her mother's chair and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Everyone she trusted was questioning her sanity, but the evidence was real, tangible. The hospital bracelet sat on the coffee table like an accusation, proof that someone wanted her to know Thomas was alive and receiving medical care. She opened her laptop and began researching ways to fake death, disappear legally, assume new identities. The internet revealed a disturbing number of people who had successfully staged their own deaths to escape debts, criminal charges, or unwanted relationships. With enough planning and resources, it was entirely possible for someone to vanish from one life and begin another. Thomas had the knowledge. His business background had given him understanding of financial systems, legal processes, bureaucratic loopholes. His brief medical training would help him navigate healthcare systems under false pretenses. Most importantly, he had the personality for it. Meticulous, controlling, patient enough to plan for months or years. Emma found herself remembering strange details from their last weeks together. Thomas's sudden interest in her daily routine, his questions about her friendships, her family, her plans for the future, his frequent business trips that he never discussed in detail, his insistence on updating their wills and insurance policies, citing responsible financial planning. She had attributed his behavior to normal marital concerns, but now it felt like reconnaissance. Had he been planning his death even then? Had he known about her relationship with James? The pregnancy timeline suggested Thomas couldn't be the baby's father, which meant he would have discovered her infidelity eventually through basic mathematics, if nothing else. The thought made her stomach churn. Thomas's sense of ownership over her had been absolute during their marriage. The idea that she might have relationships, feelings, or experiences independent of him had always enraged him. Discovering she was pregnant with another man's child would have triggered his deepest fears about losing control. Julie arrived the next morning, looking simultaneously worried and skeptical. She hugged Emma carefully, mindful of the pregnancy, but her expression remained troubled as she surveyed the farmhouse with its drawn curtains and multiple locks. "You look terrible," Julie said with characteristic bluntness. "When's the last time you slept through the night?" "I sleep fine," Emma lied. "I'm just being cautious until the police figure out what's happening." They sat in the kitchen over coffee, decaf for Emma, while Julie studied the hospital bracelet and the notebook where Emma had been documenting incidents. Her sister was 3 years older, practical and direct in ways that had sometimes annoyed Emma, but now felt comforting. "Let's say—" "You're right," Julie said finally. "Let's say Thomas somehow survived and is doing this to you. What's his end game? What does he want?" Emma touched her belly instinctively. "The baby. control, revenge for my relationship with James, all of the above. You never told me about James. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. It was brief. And it's over? He transferred to another library system before I knew about the pregnancy, but Thomas must have found out somehow. Julie absorbed this information with the same methodical consideration she brought to her work as an accountant. If Thomas is alive, he's committed fraud, insurance fraud, probably multiple identity crimes. He's also stalking you and causing emotional distress to a pregnant woman. These are serious felonies. Try convincing him of that. Thomas never believed rules applied to him the same way they applied to other people. They spent the afternoon going through Emma's mother's papers, looking for anything that might explain the survey visits or provide clues about Thomas's possible survival. In a box of financial records, they found something that made Emma's blood freeze. Documentation of a life insurance policy on Thomas that Emma had never seen before. The policy was for $500,000, taken out 6 months before Thomas's death, with Emma as the sole beneficiary. She had never signed any documents, never been informed of the policy's existence, yet her signature appeared on multiple forms with a notarization date she remembered clearly, the day Thomas had asked her to sign routine business paperwork. Without reading it carefully, "He planned this," Emma whispered, staring at the documents. "The policy, the staged death, all of it. He wanted me to collect the insurance money, probably so he could access it later somehow." Julie was already reaching for her phone. "We need to call Detective Burns immediately. This is evidence of premeditation, insurance fraud on a massive scale." As Emma listened to her sister relay their discovery to the detective, she felt the baby kick sharply against her ribs. The child she carried was innocent of the deception and manipulation surrounding its existence, deserved better than to be born into Thomas's web of lies and control. For the first time since Thomas's supposed death, Emma felt genuinely hopeful. Evidence was mounting, officials were taking her seriously, and she was no longer alone in believing her own perceptions. Whatever Thomas was planning, she would be ready for him. Emma discovered the ultrasound photos scattered across her bed when she returned from her doctor's appointment on Thursday afternoon. The images from her 20-week scan, the ones she kept in her bedside drawer, were arranged in a deliberate pattern across the quilt her grandmother had made. Each photo had been defaced with red ink, possessive messages scrawled in Thomas's familiar handwriting. "My baby," one photo declared. "My family. She belongs to me," another read. The words cutting across the fuzzy outline of the baby's profile. The most disturbing was written across an image showing the baby's tiny hand. "I'll be watching her grow up." Emma's knees gave out, and she sat heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at the violated images. Someone had been inside the farmhouse while she was gone, had gone through her most private belongings, had claimed ownership of the child she carried. The violation felt more intimate than physical assault. She called Detective Burns, her voice barely steady enough to convey what she had found. He arrived with a crime scene photographer and spent 2 hours dusting for fingerprints, collecting evidence, documenting the break-in that showed no signs of forced entry. "The locks weren't picked or broken," Detective Burns explained, studying. "The front door mechanism. Either someone had a key or they're skilled enough to bypass your security without leaving traces." "Thomas was always good with locks," Emma said, remembering how he had taught her to pick the old farmhouse door when they were dating. She had thought it was charming then, a useful skill. Now it felt like he had been planning even then. Detective Burns revealed that his investigation had uncovered disturbing information about Thomas's supposed death. The boat wreckage was consistent with an explosion, but the amount of debris was wrong. Too little wood, too much fiberglass. It looks like someone detonated pieces of a different boat, maybe one that was already damaged beyond repair. So the whole accident was staged. That's our working theory. We're also looking into the Coast Guard's search. Thomas had contacts in the maritime community through his business dealings. It's possible he had inside information about search patterns, timing, weather conditions. Emma felt sick imagining the level of planning involved. Thomas had orchestrated his own death with the precision he brought to everything else, manipulating emergency responders, insurance companies, and his own wife with equal efficiency. "There's something else," Detective Burns continued. "We found evidence that someone has been accessing your medical records illegally. Someone knew about your pregnancy timeline, your due date, even specific details from your ultrasound appointments." The baby kicked sharply, as if responding to Emma's surge of fury. Thomas had been monitoring her pregnancy like a research project, cataloging information about the child she carried. The ultrasound photos weren't random trophies. They were proof of surveillance, evidence of his continued ownership claims over her body and her baby. Julie insisted on staying at the farmhouse. That night, bringing an overnight bag and a determination to protect Emma that reminded her powerfully of their mother. They checked every lock, secured every window, and positioned chairs against the doors before settling in the living room with quilts and pillows. "Tell me about James," Julie said as they settled in for their vigil. "I need to understand the whole situation." Emma found herself describing the brief relationship that had meant so much and cost so much. James had been gentle where Thomas was controlling, interested in her thoughts where Thomas dismissed her opinions, content to let her be herself where Thomas constantly tried to reshape her into his ideal. "It wasn't really about the physical relationship," Emma explained. "It was about feeling like myself again, remembering who I was before Thomas started editing me into someone more convenient." "Do you think Thomas knew? He suspected something?" "The last few weeks before his death, he kept asking strange questions about my loyalty, whether I had been talking to anyone about our relationship. I thought he was being paranoid, but maybe he had actual evidence." They dozed fitfully, taking turns staying awake to watch for unusual sounds or movements outside. Around 3 in the morning, Emma was startled awake by the sound of her phone. Ringing. The caller ID showed Thomas's old number, the cell phone that should have been disconnected months ago. Emma answered with shaking hands, putting the call on speaker so Julie could hear. "Hello, Emma." Thomas's voice was exactly as she remembered, warm, familiar, utterly terrifying in its normalcy. "I hope I didn't wake you, but we need to discuss your situation." "Thomas." Emma's voice came out as a whisper. "You're supposed to be dead." He chuckled, the same sound that used to make her feel cherished and now made her skin crawl. "Death is just a legal status, sweetheart. What matters is that I'm here now and I know everything. About James, about the baby, about your pathetic attempts to escape me." Julie grabbed Emma's hand, squeezing tightly as they listened to the voice of a man who should have been buried months ago. "What do you want?" Emma managed to ask. "I want my family back. I want my wife to remember her vows, her promises, her place. And I want to raise my daughter properly without the influence of people who don't understand our relationship." "She's not your daughter," Emma said, finding strength in Julie's presence. "She's not yours, and neither am I. Not anymore." The silence stretched long enough that Emma wondered if Thomas had hung up. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all warmth. "Everything you have belongs to me, Emma. The house, the money, the life growing inside you. I gave you everything and you repaid me with betrayal. But I'm a generous man. I'm willing to forgive your mistakes if you come home where you belong." I'm home," Emma said. "This is my mother's house, my inheritance. You have no claim here." "Don't I?" Thomas's voice carried a smile she could picture perfectly. "Check your deed, sweetheart. Check the property transfers. Check who actually owns that farmhouse you think is your sanctuary." The call ended, leaving Emma and Julie staring at each other in the lamplight. Emma felt the baby moving restlessly inside her, as if the child could sense the danger surrounding them both. "He can't own this place," Julie said. "Mom left it to you in her will. I was there when she signed the papers." But Emma was already moving toward her mother's desk, pulling out the property documents she had filed away months ago. Her hands shook as she read through legal descriptions and transfer records, looking for something that would prove Thomas wrong. What she found instead was a mortgage document she had never seen before, dated 3 months before her mother's death. The farmhouse, which Emma had believed was paid off decades ago, had been used as collateral for a substantial loan. The borrower was listed as Emma Thompson, with her forged signature notarized on documents she had never seen. "He did this," Emma whispered, showing Julie the paperwork. "Somehow he got access to Mum's property records, forged my signature, took out a mortgage against the house. If I can't make the payments, he gets the house," Julie finished. "He planned to control you even after faking his death. This is next-level manipulation, Emma." Emma sank into her mother's chair, feeling the weight of Thomas's deception settling around her like a trap that had been years in the making. He hadn't just faked his death. He had systematically destroyed her independence, her security, her ability to escape his control. The farmhouse that should have been her sanctuary was just another chain binding her to him. The baby kicked hard against Emma's ribs, a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She placed both hands on her belly and made a silent promise to the child she carried. Thomas would not win. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would find a way to break free from his web of lies and manipulation. "We called Detective Burns." "First thing in the morning," Julie said. "This is mortgage fraud, forgery, identity theft. The man is building himself a criminal empire." Emma nodded, but she knew Thomas was too smart to leave evidence that could easily convict him. Every document would be perfectly executed, every signature expertly forged, every legal maneuver designed to look legitimate on the surface. He had been planning this for months, maybe years, and he had the resources and knowledge to make it nearly impossible to prove fraud. But nearly impossible wasn't the same as impossible. Emma had something Thomas had never expected her to develop: the determination to fight back. Her mother's strength lived in these walls, in the journals that revealed a history of women who refused to surrender to men who saw them as possessions. Thomas might own the paperwork, but Emma owned the truth, and she was finally ready to use it. Emma found her mother's diary hidden behind a loose board in the bedroom closet, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a faded ribbon. Unlike the journal she had discovered earlier, this one was older, filled with entries dating back to Emma's childhood and continuing through her mother's final weeks. The entries revealed a woman who had spent decades studying the patterns of abuse, learning to recognize the warning signs she had missed in her own life. June 3rd, 1995. Emma's teacher says she's become withdrawn this year, less talkative in class. I wonder if she remembers more about Robert than I hoped. Children absorb so much, even when we think we're protecting them. September 15th, 2019. Emma called today, but Thomas answered the phone again. When I asked to speak with her, he said she was resting, couldn't be disturbed. It's been 3 weeks since I've heard her voice directly. This feels like Robert all over again. The gradual isolation, the control disguised as protection. December 10th, 2023. Went to see Dr. Patterson about the pain in my chest. He wants to run tests, but I'm more worried about Emma than myself. I see how she defers to Thomas in every conversation, how she apologizes for opinions she hasn't even expressed yet. I tried to talk to her about maintaining independence in marriage, but she looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Emma's hands trembled as she read her mother's growing concerns, the careful documentation of Thomas's controlling behavior, that she had been too deep inside the situation to recognize. Her mother had been building a case, collecting evidence of psychological abuse with the patience of someone who understood how insidious manipulation could be. February 20th, 2024. Emma hasn't visited in 2 months. Thomas says she's too busy. with household projects to travel, but she used to love coming to the farmhouse. I remember how she would sit on the porch for hours, reading, relaxing, being herself. Now she seems like a different person, smaller, more anxious, constantly looking to Thomas for approval before speaking. March 8th, 2024. Called Janet Peterson, Emma's college friend. She hasn't heard from Emma in over a year, said Emma used to email regularly, but the messages stopped suddenly. Janet tried calling several times, but Thomas always said Emma wasn't available. This is textbook isolation. Cut the victim off from support systems. Make them dependent on the abuser for all social contact. Detective Burns arrived that morning with a team of forensics experts and a warrant to search the property for evidence of fraud. Emma showed him the diary entries, watching his expression grow grimmer as he read her mother's careful documentation of Thomas's psychological manipulation. "Your mother was building a case," he said. "These entries show a clear pattern of abuse escalating over time. She was documenting evidence like someone who expected to need it eventually. The forensics team discovered that the farmhouse had been under sophisticated surveillance for months. Tiny cameras were hidden in the kitchen, living room, and Emma's bedroom, devices so small they could have been installed during routine maintenance visits or while Emma was away. Thomas had been watching her grieve him, monitoring her pregnancy, studying her daily routines with the obsession of a predator. The cameras transmit to a receiver somewhere within a 2-mile radius, the lead technician explained. Whoever's been watching you is close by, probably has a permanent base of operations in the area. Emma felt violated in ways she struggled to articulate. Thomas had been watching her sleep, monitoring her conversations with Julie and Mrs. Patterson, observing her most private moments throughout her pregnancy. The farmhouse that should have been her sanctuary had been just another stage for his psychological theater. Mrs. Patterson arrived with lunch and stayed to provide moral support as the investigation continued. She revealed that she had been keeping her own informal record of suspicious activities. Strange vehicles parked on the county road, utility workers who couldn't explain what they were repairing, delivery trucks that never actually delivered anything. "I should have said something sooner," she confided to Emma, "but it all seemed so subtle, so easy to explain away individually. It's only now that I see the pattern." Julie spent the afternoon on the phone with lawyers, insurance investigators, and financial experts, trying to unravel the web of fraudulent documents Thomas had created. The mortgage on the farmhouse was just the beginning. He had opened credit accounts in Emma's name, transferred money from joint accounts she thought were closed, even applied for government benefits using her identity. "He's been stealing your identity systematically," Julie reported, "building debt in your name, creating financial obligations you'll be responsible for. If you can't pay, he gets everything, the house, the insurance money, even your credit rating." Emma sat in her mother's chair, feeling the baby flutter inside her as she processed the scope of Thomas's deception. He hadn't just faked his death. He had constructed an elaborate prison designed to trap her financially, emotionally, and legally. Every move she made played into his larger strategy of control. Dr. Patterson called that evening with concerning news about Emma's latest blood pressure readings. The stress of the past weeks was affecting both Emma and the baby, creating risks for premature labor and other complications. "You need to consider your options carefully," he advised. "Prolonged stress at this stage of pregnancy can have serious consequences. Is there somewhere safe you can go, somewhere away from all this uncertainty?" Emma looked around the farmhouse that had been her mother's refuge and her own prison. Thomas's surveillance equipment had been removed, but she knew he would find other ways to monitor her. The cameras had been just one element of his comprehensive control system. "I'm staying here," she told Dr. Patterson. "This is my home, my inheritance from my mother. I won't let anyone drive me away from it." But even as she spoke the words, Emma wondered if she was being brave or foolish. Thomas had planned every aspect of this psychological campaign with meticulous care. He had turned her refuge into a trap, her independence into debt, her pregnancy into a weapon against her. The baby kicked strongly, as if responding to her thoughts. Emma placed her hands on her belly and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. This child would not grow up in Thomas's shadow, would not learn that love meant control and care meant manipulation. Her mother had broken free from an abusive marriage and built a life of strength and independence. Emma carried that legacy in her blood, in the farmhouse that surrounded her, in the determination growing stronger with each revelation of Thomas's deception. Thomas might have planned for everything, but he had underestimated the woman Emma was becoming. The frightened, isolated wife he had left behind was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to recognize manipulation and refuse to accept it. Emma opened a fresh notebook and began writing, not documentation of incidents this time, but plans. Thomas wanted a psychological war. She would give him one, but this time she would be fighting back. The entries in her mother's diary had revealed something Thomas couldn't have anticipated. Emma had inherited more than just the farmhouse. She had inherited the strength of women who refused to surrender, the wisdom of someone who had mapped the patterns of abuse, and the determination to break cycles that had damaged too many generations. Thomas had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate plan. He had given Emma time to discover who she really was beneath the fear he had cultivated. And the woman she was becoming was someone he had never met before, someone who would not be controlled, manipulated, or terrorized into submission. The baby moved restlessly as Emma wrote, as if sensing the shift in her mother's resolve. Soon, Emma promised silently, they would both be free. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would change everything Emma thought she understood about her situation. Dr. Patterson had ordered the test as part of routine prenatal screening, but when Emma opened the sealed envelope, in her kitchen, the implications hit her like a physical blow. Paternity analysis. Probability of paternity for Thomas Barrett. Thompson. 0%. Emma stared at the clinical language that confirmed what she had suspected but never wanted to prove. The baby she carried was not Thomas's biological child. The dates aligned perfectly with her brief relationship with James, the gentle librarian who had shown her what kindness looked like after years of Thomas's psychological manipulation. But if Thomas wasn't the baby's father, why had he orchestrated this elaborate revenge scheme? Why fake his death, commit fraud, and stalk her through her pregnancy if the child wasn't even his? The answer came in a rush of memories that made Emma's stomach churn. Thomas had been sterile. A childhood illness had left him unable to father children, a fact he had hidden from Emma throughout their marriage. She remembered now his evasive answers about starting a family, his insistence that they wait until the right time that never seemed to come. Thomas had known from the beginning that any pregnancy Emma experienced couldn't be his. Her brief relationship with James, her discovery that she was expecting, it all would have confirmed his worst fears about losing control over her. The pregnancy wasn't just evidence of her infidelity, it was proof that she could have experiences, relationships, and futures that didn't include him. Emma called Detective Burns with shaking hands, explaining the DNA results and their implications. He arrived within an hour, bringing news that transformed the investigation from stalking to something far more sinister. "We found James Peterson's body yesterday," Detective Burns said gently. "He was discovered in a cabin about 20 miles from here. He'd been dead for approximately 2 months. Emma's world tilted sideways. James, kind, gentle James, who had shown her what love could look like without control, was dead. The father of her unborn child had been murdered while she was carrying his baby in ignorance of his fate. The coroner's preliminary findings suggest homicide," Detective Burns continued. "Someone with medical knowledge, possibly paramedic training. The scene was staged to look like a suicide, But there were inconsistencies. Thomas, Emma whispered. Thomas killed him. The full scope of Thomas's revenge plan crystallized with horrifying clarity. He hadn't just faked his death to escape consequences. He had systematically eliminated everyone who threatened his control over Emma. James was dead because he had given Emma something Thomas couldn't: genuine love, respect, and the child growing inside her. "There's more," Detective Burns said. "We found evidence in the cabin that suggests Peterson was held there for several days before his death. Someone was questioning him, probably trying to get information about his relationship with you." Emma felt bile rise in her throat. Thomas had tortured James for information about their relationship, about Emma's feelings, about the pregnancy that proved his ultimate failure as a husband. The baby kicked sharply as if responding to her distress, and Emma placed protective hands over her belly. The timeline suggests Peterson was killed shortly after transferring to the new library system, Detective Burns continued. Someone made sure he couldn't be a part of your child's life, couldn't provide support or alternate paternity claims. Emma understood now why Thomas had been so confident during their phone conversation, so certain that everything belonged to him. He had eliminated James, established legal claim to the farmhouse through fraud, and positioned himself to take control of both Emma and the baby once she gave birth. The child might not be his biologically, but Thomas intended to raise it as his own, the ultimate act of possession and control. "He's going to come for me when the baby is born," Emma realized. "He's eliminated James, isolated me financially, destroyed my support systems. He wants to take the baby and disappear, maybe kill me and make it look like childbirth complications." Detective Burns nodded grimly. "We're working under that assumption. The problem is, Thomas has been planning this for months, maybe years. He has resources, false identities, and clearly no moral boundaries. We need to be prepared for him to make his move soon." Emma's due date was only 3 weeks away. The baby had dropped lower in recent days, and she was experiencing the irregular contractions that signaled early labor could begin at any time. Thomas would know her medical timeline. He had been monitoring her pregnancy through surveillance and hacked medical records. He would be ready to act when she was most vulnerable. That afternoon, Julie arrived with a team of private security specialists and a determination to protect Emma that bordered on fierce. She had liquidated investments, called in favors, and hired the kind of protection usually reserved for celebrities and politicians. "I don't care what it costs," Julie declared. "Thomas killed James, staged his own death, and committed fraud on a massive scale. He's not getting near you or that baby." But Emma knew Thomas better than anyone. He was patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless when his control was threatened. Security teams and police protection would only delay his plans, not stop them. He had been studying her for months, learning her routines, understanding her weaknesses. Mrs. Patterson arrived that evening with disturbing news. "There's been a man asking questions about you at the diner in town," she reported, "claiming to be your brother-in-law, saying the family is worried about your mental health. He's been telling people you've been having delusions about your dead husband." Emma felt a chill of recognition. Thomas was building a narrative that would explain her eventual disappearance or death. If she claimed he was alive and stalking her, it would be dismissed as psychological breakdown. If she died under suspicious circumstances, he had already established that she was mentally unstable, possibly suicidal. "He's been setting up the story for months," Emma realized. "Every incident, every call to police, every report of strange occurrences. He knew people would think I was having a breakdown. When something happens to me, everyone will say it was inevitable." Detective Burns confirmed her fears. "We've checked with the hospital where the bracelet originated. No patient matching Thomas's description, no record of the admission date. It was planted evidence, designed to make you look paranoid and delusional." Emma sat in her mother's chair, feeling the baby's restless movements as she processed the full scope of Thomas's psychological manipulation. He had orchestrated every aspect of her terror, from the coffee mug to the surveillance cameras, creating a pattern of incidents that would make her appear mentally unstable to anyone who didn't know the truth. But there was something Thomas hadn't anticipated. Emma's mother had documented his controlling behavior for years, creating a record that preceded his supposed death. Detective Burns had physical evidence of fraud, surveillance equipment, and now James's murder. Most importantly, Emma was no longer the isolated, controlled woman Thomas had left behind. She had allies now: Julie, Detective Burns, Mrs. Patterson, even her mother's voice speaking from beyond the grave through diary entries that revealed the truth about psychological abuse. Thomas had expected to find the same frightened woman he had manipulated for years, but Emma had spent months learning to trust her own perceptions, to recognize manipulation, and to fight back. The baby kicked strongly, a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. This child deserved to be born free, to grow up without Thomas's shadow, to learn that love meant respect rather than control. Emma opened her laptop and began typing. Not documentation this time, but a comprehensive statement detailing everything. She knew about Thomas's crimes, his methods, and his probable next moves. If something happened to her, she wanted the truth preserved, wanted justice for James, wanted her child to know that she had fought back against the man who tried to own them both. Thomas thought he had planned for everything, but he had underestimated the woman Emma had become. She was no longer his victim, she was his adversary, and she was ready for whatever came next. The baby settled into a quieter rhythm, as if sensing Emma's newfound resolve. Soon they would meet face to face, mother and child, beginning a life that Thomas would never touch. Emma placed both hands on her belly and made a promise. Whatever it took, however dangerous it became, she would protect this innocent life from the man who thought he owned them both. Thomas had killed James, staged his own death, and terrorized Emma for months. But his elaborate plan had one fatal flaw. He had given Emma time to discover her own strength, and the woman she had become was someone he had never met before. Someone who would not surrender, would not be controlled, and would not let him win. Emma's water broke at 3 in the morning on a November night when the first real winter storm was battering the farmhouse. She woke to dampness and the unmistakable sensation of labor beginning, her body finally ready to bring new life into a world that Thomas had turned dangerous. Julie was sleeping in the guest room, but Emma's sharp intake of breath was enough to wake her sister's protective instincts. Within minutes, Julie was at Emma's side, timing contractions and preparing for the trip to the hospital that they had rehearsed, but hoped would never come under these circumstances. "The contractions are still 8 minutes apart," Julie reported, checking her phone. "We have time, but we need to call Detective Burns and the security team." Emma nodded, focusing on her breathing as another wave of pain rolled through her abdomen. The baby was coming whether Thomas was ready or not, which meant his timeline had just accelerated. Everything he had been planning would have to happen now, while Emma was most vulnerable and least able to defend herself. Detective Burns arrived. Within 20 minutes, his team setting up a secure corridor between the farmhouse and the hospital. The storm complicated everything. Visibility was poor, roads were treacherous, and emergency response times would be delayed. If Thomas was going to make his move, these conditions provided perfect cover. "We've identified 3 possible locations where Thomas might be hiding," Detective Burns briefed Emma as Julie packed her hospital bag. "Abandoned hunting cabins, vacant rental properties, anywhere with minimal neighbors and easy escape routes. We have teams checking each location, but he's been smart about staying hidden." Emma's contractions intensified as they prepared to leave. The baby seemed eager to enter the world, pressing downward with increasing urgency. Emma found herself torn between excitement about meeting her child and terror about what Thomas might do to claim them both. The drive to the hospital felt like a combat mission. Police cars flanked Emma's vehicle, sirens cutting through the storm as they navigated Slick roads and limited visibility. Emma gripped Julie's hand, breathing through contractions while scanning every shadow for signs of Thomas's presence. At the hospital, security was tight but professional. Emma had been pre-registered under an assumed name, her real identity known only to essential medical staff and law enforcement. Detective Burns had coordinated with hospital security to establish multiple checkpoints and verification protocols for anyone requesting access to the maternity ward. Dr. Patterson met them. At the emergency entrance, his usual calm demeanor heightened by awareness of the unusual circumstances. "Emma, your labor is progressing normally, but we're going to take extra precautions given the security situation. You'll be in a private room with restricted access." Emma was settled into a delivery room that felt more like a fortress than a medical facility. Security cameras monitored every entrance, armed guards were stationed at key checkpoints, and Julie never left Emma's side. But even with all these protections, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas was somewhere nearby, watching, waiting for the right moment to claim what he considered his property. As her labor progressed, Emma found herself remembering her mother's strength during difficult times. The diary entries had revealed a woman who had survived abuse, protected her daughter, and built a life of independence despite overwhelming challenges. That same strength lived in Emma now, passed down through generations of women who refused to surrender to men who saw them as possessions. Detective Burns received updates throughout the night as his teams searched for Thomas. 2 of the suspected hideouts had been abandoned recently, but showed signs of occupation: food supplies, medical equipment, surveillance gear. Thomas had been moving between locations, staying ahead of the investigation while monitoring Emma's pregnancy and preparing for this moment. "We found something disturbing at the second cabin," Detective Burns reported during a brief lull between contractions. "Baby supplies, a nursery set up in one room, documents establishing a new identity for a family of 3. He's been planning to take you and the baby, disappear completely." Emma felt a surge of rage that temporarily overwhelmed the physical pain of labor. Thomas had killed James, terrorized her for months, and now planned to kidnap both her and the baby to play out some twisted fantasy of family life. The audacity of his delusions was matched only by the meticulous planning he had invested in making them reality. Around midnight, the storm intensified, and the hospital's backup generators kicked in as the primary power grid struggled with the weather. In the brief flicker between power sources, Emma caught sight of a familiar silhouette in the hallway beyond her room's security glass. "He's here," she whispered to Julie, who immediately alerted the security team. But when guards checked the corridor, they found only hospital staff going about their regular duties. No one matching Thomas's description, no unauthorized personnel, no evidence of security breaches. Emma began to doubt her own perceptions. Was the stress of labor making her see threats that didn't exist? Dr. Patterson checked Emma's progress and announced that she was fully dilated. "It's time to push, Emma. Your baby is ready to be born." Emma gripped Julie's hand and focused on the monumental task ahead of her. Bringing life into the world required all her strength, all her concentration. She couldn't afford to be distracted by shadows and fears, real or imagined. But as the first serious contraction began, Emma heard something that made her blood freeze. Thomas's voice in the hallway, speaking with professional authority to someone just beyond the door. "I'm Dr. Thompson, consulting physician. I need to check on the patient in room 314. Emma's contractions stopped her from speaking, but she managed to catch Julie's attention and mouth Thomas's name. Julie immediately pressed the security alert button while trying to support Emma through the intense pain of active labor. The door to Emma's room opened, and a man in surgical scrubs entered with medical credentials hanging from a lanyard. His face was different. Plastic surgery had altered his features enough to fool casual observation, but Emma recognized his build, his walk, the way he carried himself with absolute confidence in spaces where he didn't belong. "Good evening, Emma," Thomas said, closing the door behind him and engaging the lock. "I see you're having our baby a bit early. How convenient that I'm here to help with the delivery." Emma tried to scream for help, but another contraction seized her body and she could only focus on breathing through the pain. Thomas moved with practiced efficiency, checking the medical equipment and positioning himself as if he belonged in the delivery room. "The security team is very impressive," Thomas continued conversationally, pulling on surgical gloves. "But hospital credentialing systems are surprisingly easy to hack when you have the right background knowledge. Amazing what you can accomplish with paramedic training and basic computer skills." Julie lunged for the security button again, but Thomas intercepted her smoothly, his grip on her wrist firm, but not violent. "Please don't make this more difficult than necessary, Julie. I'm here to help deliver my daughter safely. Family should be present for important moments like this. She's not your daughter," Emma gasped between contractions. "The DNA tests prove—" "Biology is irrelevant," Thomas interrupted. "I'll be raising her, shaping her, teaching her about loyalty and family values. She'll know me as her father, and that's what matters." Emma realized that Thomas's delusions had evolved beyond simple revenge into complete fantasy. He genuinely believed that kidnapping her and the baby would create the family life he had always demanded. The murder of James, the staged death, the months of psychological torture, all of it had been leading to this moment when he would claim ownership of both Emma and the child she carried. Dr. Patterson's voice carried from the hallway as he argued with someone about accessing the room. Security protocols were slowing everyone down, giving Thomas precious minutes to implement whatever plan he had devised. Another contraction gripped Emma, stronger than any before, and she felt the baby moving downward with increasing urgency. Her child was going to be born in the next few minutes, whether Thomas was present or not. Emma focused on that biological imperative, gathering every ounce of strength her mother had passed down through generations of strong women. "You can fight this all you want," Thomas said, monitoring the medical equipment with professional competence. "But you're about to give birth to a baby who needs both parents. I'm prepared to provide the family stability she deserves." Emma met his eyes with steady determination. "The only thing she needs is to be safe from you." Thomas smiled with the same confident charm that had once made Emma feel chosen. Now it only made her more determined to protect the innocent life about to enter the world. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine whether her child grew up free or became another victim of Thomas's need for absolute control. The baby was coming, ready or not, and Emma was finally ready to fight back. Thomas moved around the delivery room with the confidence of someone who belonged there, checking monitors and adjusting equipment as if he were the attending physician rather than a stalker who had murdered the baby's real father. Emma gritted her teeth through another intense contraction, her body demanding that she focus on bringing life into the world, even as her mind reeled with the impossibility of her situation. "The baby's heart rate is strong," Thomas announced, reading the fetal monitor with professional competence. "She's eager to meet her family." Emma caught Julie's eye and made a subtle gesture toward the medical alert bracelet their mother had given her years ago. A piece of jewelry that looked decorative but contained an emergency beacon for exactly this kind of crisis. Julie nodded, almost imperceptibly, understanding the silent communication that had developed between them during weeks of living under threat. "You can't actually think this is going to work," Emma said, trying to keep Thomas talking while Julie maneuvered closer to the emergency controls. "Security will realize you don't belong here. Dr. Patterson knows I'm not married to anyone named Thompson anymore." Thomas smiled with the patient condescension she remembered from their marriage. "Hospital records show that Dr. Thompson is consulting on your case due to complications with the pregnancy. I have proper credentials, appropriate clearances, and a professional relationship with this facility dating back several months. Amazing what you can establish with enough planning and the right connections. Another contraction seized Emma, and she felt the baby's head crowning. The intensity of labor left her unable to speak, barely able to think beyond the biological imperative driving her body. Thomas moved to assist with the delivery, his hands steady and practiced despite the insanity of the situation. "That's it. Emma, you're doing beautifully. Our daughter is almost here." The possessive pronoun sent rage through Emma that temporarily overcame even the pain of childbirth. This baby was not Thomas's daughter, would never be his property, would grow up free of the psychological manipulation that had trapped Emma for years. Maternal protectiveness surged through her with fierce intensity. Julie managed to activate Emma's medical alert bracelet while Thomas was focused on the delivery. The device sent an immediate signal to Detective Burns and hospital security, broadcasting Emma's exact location and triggering emergency protocols that would bring help within minutes. Thomas glanced at the equipment panel as new alarms began sounding, his expression shifting from confident control to alert concern. "What did you do?" "What I should have done years ago," Emma gasped. "I called for help." The baby's head emerged with the next contraction, and Emma felt the profound relief of progress mixed with terror about what Thomas might do when he realized his plan was falling apart. He had killed James to eliminate competition for the baby's paternity. What would he do to medical staff who tried to interfere with his delusions of fatherhood? "The security alert doesn't matter," Thomas said, though. His voice carried new tension. "By the time they sort through hospital protocols and identification procedures, we'll be gone. I have transport waiting, a place prepared for our family to start over." Emma pushed with everything she had, feeling her daughter slip further into the world with each contraction. The baby was almost here, almost safe, almost beyond Thomas's reach, if Emma could just hold on long enough for help to arrive. "She's beautiful," Thomas whispered as the baby's shoulders emerged. "Perfect and healthy, just like I knew she would be." The door to the delivery room rattled as someone tried the handle, then pounded urgently when it wouldn't open. Dr. Patterson's voice carried through the barrier, demanding immediate access to his patient. Security guards added their voices to the chorus, professional authority mixing with genuine concern. Thomas drew a syringe from his medical bag, the liquid inside clear and ominous. "Emergency sedative," he explained to Emma. "You'll sleep through the transport. Wake up somewhere safe where we can be a proper family." "Thomas, stop," Julie said, stepping between him and Emma. "This has gone far enough. The baby is coming whether you help or not, but you don't have to make this situation worse." "Worse?" Thomas's voice carried the edge of someone whose carefully constructed reality was cracking under pressure. "I'm saving this family. Emma doesn't understand what's best for her, what's best for our daughter. She never understood how to make the right choices." Emma felt the baby's body slip free with one final push, followed immediately by the incredible relief of completed birth and the first crying sounds of new life. Her daughter, James's daughter, had entered the world despite Thomas's presence. Despite months of terror and manipulation, Thomas caught the baby with practiced skill, but Emma could see the dangerous gleam in his eyes as he looked at the child he intended to claim. The newborn's cries filled the room, demanding attention and care from people who would love rather than control her. "Give me my baby," Emma said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Our baby," Thomas corrected, holding the infant possessively. "And she's coming with me." The pounding on the door intensified, accompanied by the sound of electronic locks being overridden by security personnel. Thomas's window of opportunity was closing rapidly, but Emma knew that cornered predators were often most dangerous when their escape routes were blocked. The door burst open as Detective Burns and hospital security flooded into the delivery room. weapons drawn and voices demanding that Thomas step away from the newborn baby. But Emma could see in his eyes that he had passed beyond rational thought, into the desperate territory of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing. "Everyone stay back," Thomas commanded, holding Emma's daughter with one arm while reaching for the syringe with his other hand. "I'm a medical professional assisting with this delivery. Any interference puts both mother and baby at risk." Emma struggled to sit up despite her exhaustion, maternal instinct overriding physical weakness as she reached toward her child. The baby's cries pierced through the tension in the room, demanding comfort and safety from people who would provide love instead of control. "Thomas, you know this won't work," Detective Burns said calmly, keeping his weapon lowered but ready. "Hospital. Security has video of you entering under false credentials. We have evidence of James Peterson's murder. Your own supposed death was fraud. There's no way out of this that doesn't end with you in prison. I faked my death to protect my family from people who don't understand our relationship," Thomas replied, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had rewritten reality to suit his needs. Emma was making poor choices, associating with inappropriate people. I had to take control of the situation. Emma found her voice, strengthened by fury and the primal need to protect her newborn daughter. "You murdered James because he showed me what love looks like without control. You terrorized me for months because you can't accept that I was never your property." Thomas's grip on the baby tightened, and Emma saw the dangerous shift in his expression that she remembered from their marriage. The moment when his charm cracked and revealed the controlling rage underneath. "You belong to me, Emma. You promised to honor and obey, to forsake all others. This baby represents everything you stole from me." "She's not your baby," Emma said, her voice steady despite her fear. "The DNA tests prove James was her father. You're holding an innocent child who has nothing to do with your delusions about ownership and control." The baby's cries intensified, and Emma could see that Thomas was struggling to manage both the infant and the syringe while facing multiple armed officers. His medical training had given him competence in handling newborns, but his psychological state was deteriorating rapidly under the pressure of his failing plan. Dr. Patterson pushed through the security personnel, his medical authority overriding law enforcement protocols when patient care was at stake. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to hand that baby to me immediately. Newborns require immediate medical attention, and you're preventing essential post-delivery." "Care, Dr. Thompson," Thomas corrected, though his voice carried new desperation. "I have medical credentials, proper training. I can provide everything this baby needs." Emma realized that Thomas's identity confusion was complete. He genuinely believed his false credentials made him a legitimate physician, that his paramedic training qualified him to care for a newborn, that his psychological manipulation constituted improper parenting. The months of planning had allowed his delusions to solidify into unshakable conviction. Julie moved closer to the bed, positioning herself between Thomas and Emma while speaking in the calm tone she might use with a frightened animal. "Thomas, look at the baby. She's crying because she needs her mother. She needs to nurse, to be held by someone who loves her unconditionally. That's not ownership. That's what babies actually need." For a moment, Thomas seemed to waver, looking down at the crying infant in his arms. Emma held her breath, hoping that some spark of sanity might penetrate his elaborate fantasy and remind him that babies were not possessions to be claimed. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by renewed determination. She needs stability, proper guidance, protection from people who would corrupt her upbringing. I can provide that better than anyone. Detective Burns signaled to his team, preparing to move if Thomas made any threatening gesture toward the baby or Emma. But the cramped delivery room made any rescue attempt dangerous, and the newborn's presence complicated every tactical consideration. Emma gathered every ounce of strength she had left and sat up fully, meeting Thomas's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who would no longer be intimidated. "Give me my daughter, Thomas. Look around this room. You're surrounded by people with guns who will do anything to protect an innocent baby. Your plan failed. It's over." Thomas's face went through a series of expressions: rage, confusion, desperate calculation. Before settling into the cold mask Emma remembered from their worst arguments. "If I can't have this family, nobody can." He raised the syringe toward the baby, and Emma's world exploded into motion. Detective Burns lunged forward while Julie threw herself toward Thomas, and Dr. Patterson dove to protect the newborn from any harm. Emma screamed with a sound that came from depths she didn't know existed, the primal cry of a mother whose child was threatened. In the chaos that followed, Emma lost sight of her baby, hearing only the sounds of struggle, and shouted commands. When the motion stopped and voices calmed, she saw Thomas on the floor in handcuffs, while Dr. Patterson cradled her daughter with the gentle competence of someone who delivered babies for a living. "She's fine," Dr. Patterson assured Emma, placing the quiet newborn in her arms. Completely healthy and safe, Emma held her daughter for the first time in circumstances that felt both perfect and surreal. The baby had stopped crying, content finally to be with her mother rather than the man who had tried to claim ownership of them both. Thomas's elaborate plan had failed, but Emma's journey to motherhood and freedom had succeeded. 3 months later, Emma sat on the farmhouse porch with her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching the spring sunshine warm the meadow where her mother had once tended gardens and raised chickens. The baby, whom she had named Grace, after her mother, was thriving with the contentment of a child, surrounded by genuine love rather than possessive control. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising efficiency once Detective Burns presented the overwhelming evidence of Thomas's crimes. The staged death, insurance fraud, identity theft, surveillance equipment, and James Peterson's murder had created an airtight case that even Thomas's expensive lawyers couldn't challenge. He was awaiting trial in the county jail, finally stripped of the charm and false credentials that had allowed him to manipulate people for years. Emma's name had been legally changed back to her maiden name, Emma Patterson, honoring both her mother's memory and her own independence. The fraudulent mortgage on the farmhouse had been voided, the forged documents exposed, and her financial security restored. More importantly, she had discovered strength she never knew she possessed, the capacity to protect both herself and her daughter from people who saw them as possessions rather than human beings. Julie visited every weekend, bringing groceries and staying to help with babysitting duties that allowed Emma to slowly rebuild her social connections. Mrs. Patterson had become an honorary grandmother to Grace, arriving most afternoons with stories about Emma's childhood and wisdom about raising strong daughters in a world that sometimes tried to diminish them. Dr. Patterson continued as Emma's physician, monitoring both her recovery from childbirth and her emotional healing from months of psychological trauma. "You've made remarkable progress," he observed during a recent appointment. "Both physically and emotionally, you're thriving in ways that motherhood sometimes makes possible." Emma had returned to work part-time at the county library, finding a comfort in the familiar environment of books and information. Her colleagues welcomed her back with genuine warmth, and she discovered that her experience with Thomas had given her unusual insight into helping other women who might be trapped in controlling relationships. The support group she had started met twice a week in the farmhouse living room. Women from the community who were learning to recognize manipulation, rebuild independence, and create lives free from fear. Emma shared her story carefully, focusing on the warning signs she had missed and the strength she had found through understanding that love should never feel like imprisonment. "The hardest part was learning to trust my own perceptions again," Emma told the group during one session. "Thomas had convinced me that my feelings, my observations, even my memories were unreliable. Recovery meant remembering that I was the expert on my own experience. Detective Burns stopped by occasionally to update Emma on Thomas's legal situation and to check on her security. The surveillance equipment had been completely removed, the fraudulent accounts closed, and Thomas's ability to monitor or contact Emma eliminated by court order and jail walls. He's still maintaining that he was protecting his family, Detective Burns reported during his most recent visit. Complete denial of reality, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. The psychiatric evaluation suggests he genuinely believes his own story about being a devoted husband and father. Emma nodded, unsurprised by Thomas's continued delusions. He never accepted that other people had independent thoughts and feelings. I think that's why the relationship with James threatened him so much. It proved I could love and be loved in ways that didn't revolve around his control. Grace stirred in Emma's arms, making the small sounds that indicated she was ready to nurse. Emma settled into the rocking chair her mother had loved, grateful for the peaceful routine of caring for a baby who would grow up knowing that love meant safety, respect, and freedom to become whoever she chose to be. The farmhouse had been restored to its role as sanctuary rather than prison. Emma had removed all traces of surveillance, changed every lock, and filled the rooms with photographs of Grace, fresh flowers from the garden, and the sounds of laughter from friends who visited regularly. The space felt alive again, inhabited by people who chose to be there rather than someone hiding and planning elaborate revenge schemes. Emma's mother's journals remained on the bookshelf, a reminder of generational patterns that could be broken with enough courage and support. She planned to share those stories with Grace someday, age-appropriately, so her daughter would understand the importance of recognizing manipulation and maintaining independence in relationships. Your grandmother was a woman who learned to trust her own voice, Emma told Grace during quiet moments. She survived abuse, protected me, and built a life of strength that I inherited along with this house. You carry that legacy too. The knowledge that you deserve to be loved for who you are, not controlled for who someone else wants you to become. The baby's eyes were beginning to focus, and Emma could see hints of James's gentle expression in her daughter's features. She had decided to tell Grace about her father when she was old enough to understand. The kind, thoughtful man who had shown Emma what healthy love looked like, whose death had prevented him from being the involved parent he would have chosen to be. Thomas would spend the rest of his life in prison, his elaborate plans reduced to evidence in filing cabinets and testimony in court transcripts. But Emma and Grace were free to build whatever future they chose, supported by people who understood that family meant care and protection rather than ownership and control. As afternoon sunlight slanted across the porch, Emma rocked her daughter and planned the evening ahead. Dinner with Julie, a video call with Dr. Patterson about Grace's development, maybe some time in the garden where her mother had once taught her that women could cultivate whatever they needed to thrive. As afternoon sunlight slanted across the porch, Emma rocked her daughter and planned the evening ahead. Dinner with Julie, a video call with Dr. Patterson about Grace's development, maybe some time in the garden where her mother had once taught her that women could cultivate whatever they needed to thrive. The farmhouse that had witnessed generations of both struggle and strength now sheltered a new beginning. Emma Patterson and her daughter Grace were safe, free, and surrounded by genuine love. Thomas's reign of psychological terror was over, replaced by the quiet contentment of a mother who had learned to trust herself, protect what mattered most, and build a life based on choice rather than control. Emma looked out across the meadow where fireflies would soon begin their evening dance, holding her daughter close and feeling grateful for the strength that had carried them both through darkness into light. The future stretched ahead of them, unlimited by the fears and manipulations of the past, bright with possibilities that Thomas had never been able to imagine. Grace opened her eyes and looked up at her mother with the steady gaze of someone who would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally. In that moment, Emma understood that surviving Thomas's elaborate revenge had given her something more valuable than safety. It had taught her the difference between being owned and being loved, between control and care, between fear and freedom. The baby closed her eyes again, content in her mother's arms, while Emma continued rocking and planning a future where both of them would thrive. The cycle of abuse that had damaged previous generations was finally broken, replaced by the kind of love that helped people grow rather than diminish them. Thomas had tried to write the ending to their story, but Emma had taken back the pen, and the story she was writing now was one of hope, healing, and the unbreakable bond between a mother who had learned to fight and a daughter who would grow up free.